welcome to the second day of a week of Wonder Women around the world. Some of you joined us yesterday. Many of you registered for the full week. It's nice to see some of the same names, and we hope you'll join us all week. So I wanted to introduce this concept. This initiative was born last year. So this is the second annual Women's Week that we did. And it was a labor of love with the marketing team at Wonderbots coming together, creatively understanding that our name is so cool. It's Wonder. Like, what do you think of with Wonder, right? As we were approaching Women's History Month. And it was like, the first thing I think of is Wonder Woman, right? So what do we do with Wonder Women? How do we get some Wonder Women together? And then we kept going, well, it's like, all right, well, it's International Day of Women is one day. Like, do we just really want one day? It's like, no, let's keep going with the W's and add a week to it. And thus a week of Wonder Women, and let's get some diversity with people from all over the world, around the world, was born. So we're really excited to bring this back, the second annual, version of this event. We have some new speakers. All week we have a variety of different careers that are represented. And the reason that we put this together is because often there's not an opportunity to just really hear the real behind people's climb to the top. You see them post on LinkedIn, you see them publish articles, hell, you might even see them on the cover of a magazine and go, but how did you get there? What happened to go from point A to point B? And so the women this week are going to be generous in their sharing, vulnerable in their outputs, and explain to us exactly how it was that they climbed to the top. We have several questions, like I said at the beginning, that have come in through registration. We also have some thematic topics that we're going to make sure that we touch on as well, since this is going to be celebrated throughout the rest of the year. It's not just Women's Month in March. We'll have snippets in post-production that's going to bring this event to life throughout the rest of this year. So thank you again, everybody, for attending, and we will go ahead and get started. Today's guest is Toni. I am so thrilled to have her. Toni, thank you so much for joining. I've been like a fangirl from the sidelines. We were partners in a past life, and now we get to collaborate on something special to us both. So why don't you kick us off by introducing yourself, what you do, and how you got there?
Absolutely. So Paula, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me as part of your Wonder Women Week. This is quite the honor, so thank you again. As Paula mentioned, my name is Toni Iafrate, and I've been in the wild world of B2B technology communications now for more than 25 years. I've had the immense pleasure of working with some amazing brands like IBM, Click Technologies, LogMeIn, and so forth. In those roles, I've overseen everything from what you would think of as traditional public relations to global social media, to ESG, to customer advocacy, to internal communications, and so forth. So really, a wide and exciting remit. Currently, I serve as the Vice President and Head of Global Communications at AlphaSense. AlphaSense is an AI-driven market intelligence platform. Think of it as the Google for business. So, 4.5 million pieces of, proprietary and premium content that really allows organizations to make, decisions based on fact and trust. And so, serving, more than 88% of the S&P 100 as customers, and it's been a great ride in my short tenure at the organization. Prior to AlphaSense, I was in a similar role at UiPath. I was at UiPath for nearly 6 years, where I built the global communications function from scratch. I was their very first communications hire and their only communications team member up until about a week before the company went public in April of 2021. So being able to see an organization grow at that scale from about $50 million when I joined to $1.4 billion, and then seeing the company through its initial public offering was quite the ride, and quite the exhausting ride at that, Paula, right, as you can imagine. Loved my journey at UiPath, but I'm an entrepreneurial spirit at heart. I like to build, and so decided to go back to the startup pre-IPO, environment, to torture myself a little bit more. No, I'm kidding. I really love what I do, and I think being able to be a part of a high growth organization is certainly where my passion lies. On the personal side of things, I went to Syracuse University, and played softball there. And I have to say that was when I think back on specific moments in my life that have been really transformational. I think going away to school, and sort of leaving the overprotective parents behind, was just a huge milestone and win in my life. I live outside of Boston in the town of Beverly with my wife and partner of nearly 20 years and our dog and cat. And we live for New England summers. So when summer hits, you find us at the beach. We have a small place on Cape Cod that we adore. And so we are beach people as much as we can possibly be, as New England allows.
Oh, that's fantastic. So thank you so much for that, Toni. And one of the things that's so interesting is, I think like we can see our resume, we can see what's on LinkedIn, we can see what people kind of say and tote about what they're doing. You've had a very robust career in communications in the marketing segment, telling stories about this crazy tech world that we're in. And how is it that you got to that point? Was that something linear? What did you study at Syracuse? Did you think,
Sure.
I want to grow up to be a global communications leader? So how did that title actually transcend in practicum?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paula. When growing up, I always said that I was going to be a lawyer. That was my dream. When you were, in fifth grade or fourth grade, and teachers wanted you to write, a paper on what you wanted to be when you grew up, it was always a lawyer. And when I went to Syracuse, I was pre-law, and quickly figured out that Syracuse has one of the best communication schools in the country. And so I decided to explore that, and there was a process to get, into that specific school at Syracuse. And I really devoted my time to doing that because what I realized was that in so many ways, what I love to do is defend. Right. I love to defend. I love to tell stories. I like to be at the forefront of how whether an organization, a client, or so forth is positioned in the external world. And so when I think of what I do today, as compared to even my dream of being a lawyer, right, I'm in essence, it's the same function, right? If I'm a lawyer, I'm defending a client or defending an organization, and I need to be completely bulletproof in how I do that. In my role today, I look at myself as the guardian of a company's reputation. And you can imagine, that's a level of accountability that you have when, if there's a crisis, if there's a situation, right, you're at the forefront of that. You're the person that they call, that they tap. And so in so many ways, it's the way I've sort of reconciled it in my own brain is that they're very similar in terms of what a lawyer does versus say what a communications person does, because it's all about how you tell the story. It's all about how you defend the reputation. And so while, I don't, while I often think about what it would have been like to go to law school, I also really, look at what I do today in a very similar way.
Yeah, no, and I can completely relate. I was a history major because I wrote papers better than bubbling scantrons in, but I was also very, very in tune with, the storytelling side of life. And I think it
Yes,
translates very naturally to have, kind of that pre-law, that history, sequential thinking to be able to put out there what it is that your company is doing, what they're changing into, and then being able, of course, to handle the adversarials that come along as well. We have a lot of
absolutely.
defending to do, right, in
We,
AI
for
and in tech.
sure.
So,
Yeah, especially. Yeah, and I think, Paula, especially in today's environment, right? There's so many societal issues, there's political issues, and having, I think, a communications person at the table to help a company really understand what those issues are, how they're perceived externally or even internally, and what, if anything, should a company do to be at the forefront of a specific issue. So I think specifically in the last, I would say 5 or so years, that's become much more of an imperative for somebody in my role, right? Is to really provide that level of counsel.
Absolutely. And I think there's some, soft skills as they call it, which I think are like the most important skills these days that come naturally, and then almost maybe get harnessed along the way in a role like
Yes.
this. So tell me a little bit about some of the things that you do to improve yourself, to improve your craft, to get better, to get smarter, to learn.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll share, and I don't often share this, but I will with this crowd. Growing up, I had a very bad speech impediment. And, I went to speech therapy 3, 4 days a week. I was bullied as a child, because of that. And, there were times where I couldn't get a certain word out of my mouth or I would have to start a sentence with a different word to avoid a word that began with the letter M. Right. So, and that's still something that I deal with to this day. It could be in, presenting or speaking to a group like, this. I could be super excited about something and I stutter and I recognize it, but maybe others around me don't. And so it's still something that I work on to this day in terms of public speaking, and really, how do I settle myself down for environments like this, it's very important to me because I don't think you would normally, as somebody that had such a speech impediment as I did to enter into the communications function, I think even my parents were a little bit surprised. So I think if anything, it has forced me outside of my comfort zone to really work on that skill because I love and have passion behind what I do so much. So that is certainly one area. And I would say too, I mean, with the advent of so many AI technologies, really staying, abreast of what those are and how they're impacting the comms function today. That's something that I talk about a lot with my own team, right? Is how do we harness these tools to our advantage? And I think it's very important to lead from the top in that manner.
That's so fantastic. And what a juxtaposition and paradox going from, a challenge and then quite literally overcoming that in your day-to-day work. That's so beautiful. And I think
Yeah.
too, there's a lot that comes with being able to overcome, challenges as well too. And I know that you're a passionate giver. So you're very generous in the community. I know you did a lot of work at UiPath as well. So tell me a little bit about the importance of giving back. Why do you say yes to things like this? So that everybody can see, that despite where we get to and what our title is and how the climb looks, we really only get to keep it if we give it away. And I know you share that value system. So tell us a little bit about how you give it away today.
Yeah, it's a great question, Paula. I stay very active in, diversity and inclusion efforts. It's something near and dear to my heart is, how do we continue to advocate on behalf of, those that are in underrepresented communities? And I have to say, it's very important to me as somebody that has a seat at the table to ensure that when I go into specific meetings or have specific conversations, I'm not only representing myself, but I'm representing those communities as well. And that's something that it's very important to me personally. But I also like to stay involved just in the community with children, right? I coach Little League. Those are, I'm all about how can you influence the next generation. I do a lot of guest lecturing at Syracuse. It's something that I love, being able to really help mold and meld the next generation of great communicators. That's, I think in many ways, Paula, many of us, we get to a certain age or a certain point in our career and we ask ourselves, what is our legacy going to be? What do I want to leave behind? And I think after doing this for as long as I have, and my first job was doing PR for Lexmark photo printers. I mean, we launched the first photo printer. So you can see how far we've come. And so I think giving back and sharing sharing those experiences, whether it be about how we launched a photo printer or how I took a company public, right? Those are also, it's how do I give back in that way so that those that are hearing from me can take those learnings and hopefully bring them into their own either efforts or how they look at specific, things. So it's really from a community point of view, but also from a giving back, legacy, sharing experiences to hopefully help others in their own journeys.
No, I think that's so important. It's one of the things that gives me, kind of motivation too, is what are we doing
Yes.
this for? Why are we doing this? And I think it is. And with so many macro factors, you mentioned political, there's so much going on in the world, that's outside of our control in many ways at this point. And so many things that we just have to accept. And I think that's part of our growth journeys too, is overcoming the different, things that come our way despite it. And
Yes.
so one of the things that often is asked in mentoring sessions, or when I'm talking to early career kiddos and they're like, how do I do my LinkedIn and what am I supposed to say about myself, is, well, how do I put myself out there? And I think in communications and marketing, we have kind of that natural, way and ability of branding ourselves. But I think more and more it's become a buzzword. People have, thought leadership moments about it. Tell me a little bit about how you built your brand in your career, because it's very special to find women who are the same on LinkedIn as they are when you say, hi, nice to meet you over a coffee, right? And that's rare. So tell me a little bit about how you bring authenticity, not the buzzword, but the reality of authenticity to your personal brand, because I think that's important for some of the up and comers.
Yeah, it's again just an awesome question. I think it took me a while, Paula, right? It
Yeah.
took me, I think, a while to be more visible and out in front with who I am as an individual. And I think, that is just part of who I am. It doesn't define who I am, but it's certainly a part of who I am. And I think, finally having that confidence to just be who you are, right? And share that, I think is very special. I think bringing your true self to the forefront, whether that be on LinkedIn, whether that be in panels just like this and conversations that you're having with younger folks that are entering the industry, I think it's really just being you and being true to your values. Because at the end of the day, nobody will take care of number one the way that you will. And so it's just so important to be you, bring that level of authenticity, show who you truly are, because you would be surprised at how many of those people around you are either struggling with the same issues or need that voice to help them push them forward. And so again, I take that very seriously, just in how I can help others in their own journey to their true selves.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
I think you saying too that it took you time is important, because it's not just automatic. And sometimes, like even a trainer, a fitness trainer, you see like this incredible chiseled body and you're like, oh my God, how did you get there? That's years and time and
Yes.
dedication and discipline. And so often the climb isn't discussed and people just see the outcome or the peak. And
It's
really
very true.
it's so important for us to say no. There's like blood, sweat, and tears. And there's times where I go on LinkedIn and I say, oh God, should I post this? Is it too controversial? But this is how I feel. I had another terrible,
Yes.
experience with a client or a sales call or something that we could do better. Is this something that I should teach or do I keep to myself? And I think it's important to say that, you wrestle with that. And today I'm very proud of the fact that when somebody meets me on a Zoom call or in person, they already have met me if they were with me
Yes.
on LinkedIn. Like Paula LinkedIn is
That's
the
right.
same as the Paula at home, is the same as the Paula on the
Yes.
couch, is the same as the Paula drinking a glass of wine. Like she's the same girl, and
Yes.
it's something that I'm very proud of, because I think a lot of times, and they've coined all these terms. Like when we were younger, they didn't have names like imposter syndrome. But growing
Yeah.
up, it was always I was too young, or how is it that she, is here, and why is she 20 years old working at ThyssenKrupp Elevator directly for the COO? Like something fishy is there. Like there was never any time for me to say no. This is like merit. I earned this. Here I am. Here
That's
I
right.
go. And you kind of get into this defensive posture rather than evangelization and advocacy. And that's the place that I think we have to get, right? So one of the other things that I think is so important to ask is if there is an example in your career where you had to either advocate for yourself or fight for yourself or ask for that raise or ask for that promotion or maybe ask for time off to take care of a family member, but something that maybe gave you butterflies in your tummy as you were going to talk to either HR or your boss. And tell us a little bit about that experience and how you overcame it and why it was important to face it.
Yeah, I remember a specific meeting that was happening, and I was not included in this meeting with the senior leaders of, an organization. And I remember going to my boss at the time and saying, I need to be in that meeting for XYZ reasons. And there was a lot of pushback. It was me basically, putting together sort of a list of reasons why. And I think being very pragmatic and thoughtful in how those were presented to my boss. And listen, Paula, right? I think I face those issues every day. And I think it's again, you have to be your best advocate, and I think you also have to know when there are times to push and when there are times to not. Right. Like, I just think like you learn that over time where there are issues that you can really sort of needle in on. And when there are issues that you're like, okay, I'm not like, this is the way it's going to be and I have to accept it. So I think it's a constant, I would say. And while I have examples galore, I think what's more important to remember is that you're likely facing that more than you realize, right? It could be advocating that hey, we got to do this press release for XYZ reasons, but the founder is coming back and saying no for XYZ reasons, right? And so it's every day. I think it's how you advocate, how you are very thoughtful about what you're putting forward and the whys behind it. And I think always anticipating the next question. And I think specifically in my role, I always have that mindset that the sky is falling. And I often say to my team, every day is a Monday when we do what we do, right? You never know what you're going to wake up to, what you're going to have to deal with. So in so many ways, we're advocating every day to ensure that the company is taking the best path forward to meet its own business goals.
That's fantastic. And I think in that too, there's a lesson in kind of insulating yourself around the stuff that you're going to take on versus not. And it's so hard sometimes to just let go. But I think that keeps us sane, to understand like Absolutely. This one's not mine. I got to say no. And that's something that I work on every single day. It's so hard for me to just let things, go or happen. We have perfectionism syndrome, that crushes us daily. Like, it's got to be great. But it's really an important lesson in energy preservation too, is pick your battles, right? And if you have more energy conserved, then you can give away to a community and harness that energy and channel it into more meaningful places than picking battles that invariably, just might not be battles worth fighting for. Sure. I think that's fantastic. Sure. So, so on a personal note, so when it comes to like how you decompress, right? I think that's important too. We had some great advice yesterday. Tamara was talking about how she blocks out an hour of mandatory quiet time, and then Kristen was saying how her husband and her take turns so that she can go to the gym or she can get some, groceries in by herself. So tell us a little bit about like, what does Toni do to decompress, to unwind, to just like turn it off, other than the beach, because we now know that you're an aficionado when it comes to the beach. Yeah. So in the dead of winter, in the tundra, what do you do?
I definitely try to block time once the weather is, decent, to take the dog for, an afternoon walk. I think, walking is very therapeutic for me personally. We live very close to the beach. And so being able to walk to the beach and just listening to the ocean, I think there's something special. I think the saying goes, the ocean, it's like, sweat, tears, and other things. And I think just, sometimes being able to just sort of sit and think and not be in front of a laptop makes a world of difference. But also, staying active. I think, especially when you have a schedule of things and you have others that are counting on you, right? And so that's why, for example, coaching Little League, yeah, I got to deal with some parents, for all those parents that are out there wanting their child to play more. But I think it's saying like, hey, I have to be at the field at this time, and I can't do a meeting at 6 because I'm coaching 12 kids, right? So it's also, I think, finding where your passions lie outside of work, and I think leaning into those because they do provide just, I think, a level of comfort that maybe you don't always find when you're sitting in front of a laptop. And I think in my case, Paula, too, I've been working at home now it's been 7 years, right? And so, while there's a convenience factor of waking up and walking downstairs to my office, there's also just missing that human interaction. And so there are many times too, I'll just drive to, Cafe Nero or Starbucks, right? I often joke with my wife that when I'm waiting in line at Starbucks, I don't mind because it's my 20 minutes that I have in my car outside of the house on a daily basis. So I think just even finding those moments, or I think recognizing when you personally just need to like a few minutes to walk away, I'll punch a punching bag in my garage. I just think like there's you know yourself better than anyone, and I think it's really important to kind of step away and take that time that you need, not just after work, but during work.
Exactly. No, I think that's so spot on. And you're right. The extroverts and introverts of the world both, if you're on either polarity, have suffered through this
Yeah.
work from home paradigm, and it's important to fill your cup. Both personally and while at work.
Yeah.
I used to do a good job blocking like,
Yes.
times in between. So it's not back to back to back to back meetings, but maybe I need to get back to that. But there's tricks
Yeah.
along the way.
For for sure. I've also started scheduling meetings for 45 minutes instead of an hour, right? For those that maybe need to be a little bit longer, because it gives me that 15 minutes after the meeting to either send a follow-up on the meeting or step away and grab a snack, right?
Yeah.
So it's I think also maybe changing some of those daily habits that you're just used to doing,
Yeah.
and really thinking about, okay, how can I, if I'm in 12 meetings in one day, how can I make that manageable? Right? It's how can I maybe change the way I'm scheduling the meetings or participating in them so that I get some extra time, in between. So it's,
Yeah.
sometimes just that breath of fresh air after a meeting just makes a difference. It really, really does.
No, it totally does. I mean, and sometimes you find yourself like, oh my God, I haven't eaten all day, and it's 12:30, you've
Hmm.
been on back-to-back calls, and it's like, that's not good. I've been
For
sitting on my
sure.
butt and I
Yes,
haven't had a bite,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. I've also, started, standing more, and, not just being sort of sedentary. I think it makes a difference. I have this little, elliptical machine under my desk that I can pedal when I'm sitting, during meetings. So it's also thinking, how can I better take care of myself, even though I'm sitting here, right?
Mhm.
And thinking of just different ways that you can remain active even though you're working.
Yeah, and infuse that a little bit of movement where possible.
Yes.
Even if you can't
Yes.
step away. No, I think that's awesome. So one of the questions that came from the audience in registration, which I think is so, so cool, is, who inspires you, right? And not past tense, maybe not present tense, maybe not future tense. Is it a parent? Is it a teacher? What do you look to as like the North Star of what good looks like in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, Paula, this is a very special question to me personally. So I'm a first generation American. Both of my parents were immigrants from Italy. My father was 4 or 5 when he came over, and my mother was 7. Went to different parts of the US, but eventually met in Boston, and the rest is history. And so, my father worked extremely hard. Education was what mattered most to my parents, was making sure that we have the best education and the best resources, even though, my parents struggled. And so I was the first in my family to graduate college. That's something that I just hold so dear to my heart. I think to have that experience and to have my parents there and support me just made a world of difference. And so every day I do what I do with my parents in mind. I have their wedding photo in my office. I visit them almost every single day. They live very close, so I'm super duper lucky. But I work every day for them. I remember, in fact, when UiPath, the day that UiPath was going public, I remember calling my parents the morning of, and my father, who is not one that gets very emotional, said, like, I could have never imagined, like, my daughter, being at the center of the financial universe, about to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And so, I do what I do with them in mind always. I owe it to them to work as hard as I possibly can.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you're making me choke up a little bit as we go
Yeah,
to the next question. But I think
yeah,
it's so important to look at, where you come from and what you're going to leave. And I think that whole full circle is probably why the legacy is so important to you, because it's not
yes,
just you. So that's so beautiful.
yeah.
I'm first generation born American as well. My parents met in DC, a good little immigrant spot to me. So I can relate in
Yeah,
totality, having cultural differences that you're infusing into your work life, and having differences of opinion, and diversity of thought, and even culture and traditions. Brazilians take
yes,
off like the entire month of February through March because it's carnival, and nobody understands, like, how does work stop? It's like, well, that's just cultural, right? And
yes,
so it's so important to have your roots kind of at the forefront, and not everybody has that story. So you are very, very
yeah,
lucky to have
yeah,
them as such big cheerleaders.
yeah,
So that's fantastic. And then the other thing that I thought is kind of adjacent question is, how do you navigate and handle any self-doubt? So like it's so
yeah.
natural for us to be like, oh my God, like I can't face this, or I can't do this. This morning I had to cancel a meeting because I didn't sleep well last night, and I knew I had to prepare for this, and I have a long day after this, and
Yes.
and it was just like, oh my God, I can't do it, and I had to step out and soak up some sun and drink my coffee on the patio and like get it together, right? So I had self-doubt this morning, facing the day,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about how you overcome self-doubt. What do you tell yourself? How do you talk to
Yeah.
internal Toni? Those tools are just so important.
They really are, Paula. And I'm glad that you asked this question because it's something that I, again, struggle with very often. And, the way that I have dealt with it is really reframing it in my own mind, right? It's like every time you say, you don't deserve this or you don't deserve to be here, it's like, no, like remind yourself of how far you've come and that you deserve to be where you are. And that even if you're making recommendations or have thoughts that maybe others don't agree with, you still deserve to have those thoughts, right? Like you still deserve to be a part of the conversation. I think the second thing is I really I track my wins. And I say that in a way because, I write a to-do list every single day. I write it out in my notebook. And the way that I view it is it's not necessarily a to-do list, but it's a celebration list. It's like when I'm crossing things off, it's like, that's a win. That's a win. And I think at the end of the week or at the end of the month, when you're able to take a look at those wins and maybe not focus on the mishaps or where you could have done better or why this didn't work, it's like focus on the wins, right? And that's really, really important. I think also talking to others about it, and I think being vulnerable in that way, whether it's your partner, whether it's a mentor, whether it's somebody like a colleague that you really trust. I think just being open about the fact that you're struggling with this and getting their perspectives. But I'll be honest, Paula. I mean, there are times where I'll step into the bathroom and look in the mirror and talk to myself and say, like, Toni, you got this. Like, why are you even questioning whether you can do this or whether you can present this? Like, come on. Like, you know what you're doing. Like, you deserve to be here. Like, man up, woman up, whatever it is. Like,
Yep.
do it. Like, you got this. And I gotta say, Paula, there are two songs that I listen to almost every single day, and they're rap songs, right? So,
I love
one is
it.
Eminem, and it's Lose Yourself. And it's like if
I
you had
love
one
it.
shot or one opportunity, like, would you take it? Like, would you, grab it or would you let it slip? I want to grab it. right? Like I'm a grabber through and through. But and the second song is called Hate It or Love It, and it's by a rapper called The Game. But it's basically like the underdog's on top and I'm going to shine, right? And I think
Yes.
I've always had an underdog mentality. I think the way I grew up, just other things, I always have that chip on my shoulder, but it makes me better at what I do. Like going in, I'm always like, I'm an underdog, but I'm gonna show up and I'm gonna kill it. And but it's not that others are telling me that I'm an under, that's what drives me.
Yes.
That's what like where I'm like, oof, like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna show them it's gonna happen. I'm an underdog, I got a chip on my shoulder. So I think for me personally, like that has worked. It obviously doesn't work for everyone, but I look to certain, whether it's music or people or talking to myself. I say I'm my own best friend. I say that often, whether I take a ride in the morning to go to Starbucks, like I'm talking to myself, I'm getting myself prepared for the day. And that really that gives me a level of motivation. Like it gets me pumped.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and it sounds like too that if you were ever in a boxing ring, you already have your walkout songs like ready to roll.
100%. Yes. Yes.
She's, she's ready to go.
And I
She's
will
ready to
just
go.
say, the morning of UiPath's IPO, I probably listened to those two songs 30 times beginning at 3 a.m. And I was so pumped up by that point, like I was ready to go. And I think do what works for you, right? But that certainly has worked for me. So
No, I no, and I think
yeah.
that's so important to the looking in the mirror and making eye contact with yourself.
Yes.
That's been a very important grounding exercise for me at different inflection points throughout my career, throughout my health journey that's been up and down. And looking into myself and it does conjure up tears if you've got stuff that you're holding on to, but it's a
Yes.
really powerful way to get introspective. And the most important person that you have to understand in this life is yourself.
That's right.
So if you can have that relationship, I think that's so, so important.
Yeah.
I think this is a great segue for one of the other questions that we wanted to thematically touch on, which is what would you tell younger Toni today? So if you had the opportunity to talk to your younger self at any point, in younger self, teenage, kiddo, being bullied, early career, what would you tell young Toni with the experience and the advice that you have, today?
Yeah, I think two major themes come to mind. One is be you.
Yep.
Don't be scared to be who you are in the workplace. Don't believe that others will not accept you or that you will have a tougher challenge or, a tougher run at what you may be doing. I think, for years, Paula, I struggled with bringing my true self to the workplace. And how
Mhm.
can you be happy at work? How can you perform best if, if another job that you have is having to sort of pretend or tell a different story about who you are? And so that would certainly be one is really just be you, and be confident in who you are. I think the second one, and this is, I'll pull a little bit from Mel Robbins, but it's let them, right? It's, let them bully you, let them make fun of you, let them. Like, but at the same time, don't let it affect you, right? I remember as a young child going home and being so upset that, I was being made fun of because of my stuttering. And my father saying to me, Toni, you're going to meet a-holes every phase of your life. When you go to high school, they're going to be there. When you go to college, they're going to be there. And believe me, when you go to the workplace, you're going to find a ton of them. And so I think in many ways, Paula, I've also carried that with me. You can tell that I really my parents have had such an influence on the way I look at so many things. But I think, it's true. You're always going to come up against maybe difficult people to work with, and it's how you define the situation or how you react to the situation. So I think it's, let them, but the truth and you know how to push forward.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
incredible advice. I think
Yeah.
that's and I think little Toni clearly thought that throughout the course of it too, because you've had your gear on for battle, you know, to fight against whatever it comes your way.
Yeah.
One of the things too, I think, is the social norms that come with the workplace too. So I got married very late for, you
Yes.
know, whatever standards, and I have chosen not to have children. It's not that I haven't had them yet, you know. We just got a dog, which was a crazy commitment, you know, like 6, 7 months ago, because we travel so much, my husband and I. But, you know, that was something too, that
Yeah.
bringing your authentic self to work, it was weird. Like, what do you mean you're in your late 30s and you're single? And what do you
Yeah.
mean like you don't want children? Like and those are questions that people, just without thinking of their common boundaries, they just have assumptions about what your
Yes.
personal life is supposed to look like.
Yes.
So I think that's another one that's you know, it's not that your personal life has to be on display or on blast, but it's also just, that's such a big part. It should be a big part of what your life is. And so how can you really show up as you if there's elements of that you're kind of hiding or negating
Right.
or not just owning, you know? And now I just say
Yes.
it, no, you
Correct.
know, we're not kids people. Like, I'm auntie to the whole world, but you know, but for several reasons, my husband and I have opted out on children. So and that's perfectly okay. And you shouldn't look at me like a
Absolutely.
weirdo, you know? So tell me a little bit about some of the personal, you know, items or lists or things that later in your career, as you built that confidence, that you were able to bring to the table. And how did that change? Is it different now? Do you still have to kind of, you know, coach yourself through it? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Paula, I think, when I joined UiPath was the first time that I was openly, gay in the workplace.
Yeah,
At other organizations, I had hid that part of my life to the extent that, my now wife, Jen, was Jim. And, it was a real struggle. I mean, I struggled so very much. I didn't want my hair to be short because I was concerned that, folks would automatically be like, well, we know who she is. Or, sharing that I played college softball because there's so many, preconceived notions around that. And so I think, when I took the role at UiPath, I said to myself, like, this is the time. I'm not, and that was only, Paula, that was only like 7 years ago,
that's so
right? So it wasn't
awesome.
even that long
Congratulations, by the
ago,
way. Yeah.
right? And so I just said to myself, like, I'm not going to hide this part of who I am. I actually remember at the time, very early on, saying to my boss at UiPath, who a fantastic person, but saying like, hey, I'm going to, I have to travel here. And he made a comment. He said, well, who's going to watch your dog? And I said, my partner. And he was like, oh, okay. Like, so I think even just using those kinds of opportunities to I just started. I was like, I'm not going to be shy. This is who I am. Like, I was the leader of their, Pride ERG, right? Like, I made myself visible. I became a voice for the community within the organization. And I think it wasn't as much of a slow roll as maybe one would anticipate, because once I just was out there, I was like, I'm out there, like this is it now, right? Like I might as well like be full force on it.
Yeah. Go big
And
or go
so I think
home at that
also,
point.
yeah, and I think also like I consider myself like an open book. Like I have
Yes.
many stories to share. And I think, I became more of an open book as to that part of my life. I got married when I was at UiPath, and my partner and I and wife will be together for 20 years in August. And so I think even sharing some of those experiences, I shared
Mhm.
that on LinkedIn, right? Like it's when it was almost like it was just such a turning point.
Yes.
Once I said, like, I'm going to be all in and bring my authentic self. And I have to say, I think I performed so much better and I was
Yep.
so much just felt free. And there's a certain feeling when you go to work where you can just feel free because people know who you are and you don't have to hide that part of you. And it made
Mhm.
me work better. It made me a better leader. It made me a better mentor. And so in so many ways, I again a very much a turning point in my career.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so true because again, if you're operating with, you know, only 80%, you know, of the real, then it's hard to say that it's easy to navigate at that point, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
you question more, especially if you're somebody who's so self-actualized and understood the way that you are. But I remember that turning point in your public persona, and I was
Yeah.
like, cheering you on in the
Thank you.
background, you know, and publicly, because it's just so important. I think for employees to respect you, for your teams to understand you, it's like they know when I have a bad day, they know when I have a good day. You know, I'm human, and part of my human is all the elements that come into that picture, you know. And
Very,
so
very true. Very,
it's
very true.
really
I mean, again, I remember when I first came out and I had a family member say to me, "You better not tell anybody at work." Like, you better not, like, you will not be promoted. They will look at you differently, all of those pieces. And that's stuck with me for, a long time. But I think I would be doing a disservice not only to myself, but to others if I
yes.
wasn't open about who I am. And really, I think showcasing or, showing like, hey, like you can get to a leadership position in an organization regardless of who you are.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
remember that it's based
Yes.
on merit, right? And I think being able to be that kind of mentor to others and
Yes.
showcase that means the world to me.
Yes. And I'm sure you've gotten feedback that's fortified the fact that that was
Yes,
exactly what you were supposed to do, you know. And
absolutely.
you know, and the universe, whether you believe in, you know, God or in spirituality or
Yeah,
whatever, or just, you know, coincidences, you know, you always get the feedback from the universe about the things that you're doing, especially when it has to do with being true to yourself. And
yes,
10 times out of 10, you know. And I think that's so important. And you probably don't even know by name all the people that you've influenced
yeah,
along the way, just
yeah,
by being you and putting your authentic self out there and being in
absolutely.
a leadership role, and with all the macro stuff that we have going on. It's more important than ever that your voice is loud and that you are you. So
Yes,
we're getting to the top of the hour, which sucks
yeah,
because I could sit here
no.
talking with you forever and ever. We have about 10 minutes left, so if anybody has any questions for Toni, please put them in the chat. I have one more from the registration that I want to ask you here too, and we will go with this one. So,
Yeah.
whenever have you faced navigating a male-dominated industry? And what did you do to ensure that your voice was heard? So you gave us one
Yeah,
example about a meeting that you weren't in, and
yeah.
but you said you had to do this continuously. So tell us a little bit about a time where you had to ensure that your voice was heard at work.
Yeah, so I think again, I think this is something that for me personally, it's an ongoing thing. It's, especially when you're the expert that they tap for specific crises or, projects or other things. I think, specifically dealing with, a crisis when you're the person that they tap and you're the quarterback and you have to really lead it and drive it. I have to say, Paula, I feel very blessed that in the roles that I've had, I have not had to necessarily deal with, an environment where my voice was not heard.
Yeah.
And maybe that's who I am as an individual. Maybe it was the environment. I'm not really sure. But
Yeah.
I think, gaining that level of trust, I think is really important. I think having that seat at the table is really important. And again, I think it's for me personally, it's been less about how do I break the glass ceiling. Instead, it's been more like the ceiling is broken. How do I ensure that I represent extremely well?
Yep. No, I think that's beautifully said. And absolutely. And I think a culmination, the importance of stories like this and talks like this is everybody getting to know you can see why it is that you have a voice,
Yeah,
you know, and that you haven't had to overcome that. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. And it looks like we have one other question.
sure.
How do you personally define success when it comes to balancing your career and your personal life?
Yeah, it's again a great question. I think I look at it as one life. And I think, even when I see my family or my wife's family, I think my brand is really the brand of like they know me as, Toni who works her ass off, that also works really hard to play harder, that, loves to dance, loves to have a great time. But I think, I think my brand is, there is no difference.
Yeah.
Like, I am just who I am. And I
Mhm.
think I bring that to the table every single day. Of course, there are times when you have to temper, maybe, more of that's kind of like outside of work, Tony. But I think at the same time, it's, how do you meld the two together so that you feel this, so that you have a level of fulfillment? And I think for
Yes.
me personally, work has really provided that, and the environments in which I've been in have really provided that, which has lended itself to how I am outside of the workplace.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think,
Yeah.
and somebody said it really well yesterday, it's not so much about balance, it's about finding harmony. Because at the end of
Yes.
the day, and I thought that was so spot
It's
on. We always get
perfectly
like one of
said.
these nuggets, but it's like, it's not balance, it's about creating harmony. And that's exactly right. I work hard so I can play, so I can enjoy things with my husband, so I can, whatever it is, the thing is, I have the privilege of being able to fly to Denver for the weekend to see my nephew, things like that.
Absolutely.
But I work hard so that those things can live in harmony, in
Yes.
my world. So I think that's so important. So
Yes.
Toni, we are at the top of the hour. I wanted to ask you one last thing. If you were to leave anybody with any golden nugget or piece of advice, or remember one thing about what you said today, what would that be?
It would be, life is short. Enjoy it. Take the time that you need outside of work with your family, with your friends. It's just, it's short. And we're here to enjoy it and live it. And I think, sitting, in front of a laptop 12 hours a day isn't necessarily,
It,
the best of the best, right? But I think it's really taking advantage of the times you have outside of work, the taking advantage of maybe programs that your organization may offer that allows you to live your passion while at work. It really is like, life is short, live it, enjoy it, have a great time, because that we're not here forever.
yeah, no, I think that's beautiful
Yeah.
advice. Toni, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate your
you.
story, your vulnerability, and for you just saying yes. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again, Paula. This was wonderful.